Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The 100 Thing Challenge: How I Got Rid of Almost Everything, Remade My Life, and Regained My Soul, by Dave Bruno. Narrated by Jonathan Todd Ross. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 20. Preface of Cats and Contentment. At 38 years old, I can say that in many ways I have realized the good life, or at least a plausible version of it. I am writing this book in my relatively large house, comfortably situated at the end of a cul-de-sac. It is located in an award-winning master-planned suburban development in Southern California. Most evenings I can stand on the deck above our garage and watch the sun sink over the Pacific Ocean about 10 miles away. I have a beautiful wife who is a talented cook, parents marvelously, and loves to read and discuss thoughtful books. Together we have helped God create 3 daughters, all of whom are healthy and have excelled in their various activities. We are free of credit card debt. My career, first in technology, then as an entrepreneur in the publishing industry, and now in marketing at a university, has helped fund my contented middle-class lifestyle. Also, very generous parents have pitched in along the way. I also own a dog. Piper is lying at my feet right now as I write. He is a mutt we rescued from the shelter. We think he is a cross between a German Shepherd and a Rhodesian Ridgeback. He is fast as lightning, has a keen nose, and is faithful to me. Then there is the cat we have living with us. If anywhere, that is the place my good life starts to break down. Though I have a measure of affection for our cat, domesticated felines have their own agenda. Perhaps that is why no one talks about cats and the good life. For example, have you ever heard anyone mention a cat and the American dream in the same sentence? We tend to believe that opportunity has an agenda set by those of us who pursue it. Cats disagree. Unlike dogs, cats are absorbed by their personal concerns, not the aspirations of their owners. But our house backs up to a field of coastal sage shrub that is home to a pack of coyotes. Those coyotes have been dining on neighborhood cats for years. Last spring, they finally ate Eustace Clarence Scrub, one of ours. Scrub was a feral cat we adopted after he fell off the roof of our friend's parents' house and lost track of his cat family. 2 weeks after Scrub was eaten, we replaced him with a new cat from the shelter we called Crisp. Our other cat, Beatrice, was indignant at the speed with which we exchanged Scrub. She sulked for months, and I know why. She had finally learned a hard truth. Even cats must submit to human notions of the good life, in that cats can be substituted with remarkable nonchalance. We talk about the good life or the American dream as if it were permanent, as if it were the finish line of a race. We say that we have arrived at the American dream. We announce that we are living the good life. And yet it has been my experience that, at least in our times, the good life and the American dream are more obsolescent than obtainable. A pet cat is never fully content, but let's be honest. Whether you're a cat lover or not, domesticated kitties are replaceable. So, too, is everything we feel we need in order to be satisfied with our lives. We buy things year after year, over and over again, in pursuit of our contentment. It has been my impression that these days replacement is emblematic of our dreams more than ownership. This is a curiosity, for it is by endlessly acquiring the right things that we measure our distance from the good life. We are always getting, but never getting there. That was my observation as well as my personal experience. For much of my life, I endeavored not for objects I could settle down with and enjoy, but just for new stuff. Too often this was my achievement. Not working hard to earn some special thing, but rather, after tucking that special something away, going back out to the mall to buy again. The 100 Thing Challenge, which my book describes, was one of several responses to the unsettled feeling I developed after years of living a life filled with stuff instead of contentment, after arriving at a reasonable version of the American dream and still groping for more. I felt I might be chasing after what was not mine to have, and what I could never get anyway. It occurred to me that I felt less like myself and more like someone I should not be. I was about to change that feeling. Part 1. The Challenge Takes Shape. Chapter 1. The 100 Thing Challenge. Here in Southern California, we San Diegans have a saying. Hawaiians wouldn't appreciate it, but we say it nonetheless. We go outside, look around, and then say, "Just another day in paradise." This saying fits most every day of the year. In San Diego, near the ocean, it's never bitterly cold, and it's never oppressively hot. I can appreciate the realities of the non-sublime weather in certain areas of the country. I spent a few years in Chicago for college before heading back to San Diego. Then I returned to the Chicago area for 2 years of graduate school. I have figured that in the 5 years, 60 months, that I spent in the Midwest, 40 months consisted of glacial winter. Another 17 months were hot, airless summer. Perhaps 3 months over the entire 5 years were pleasant. Maybe even a day or two could have been described as idyllic. San Diego is different from that. Every 5 years, we have about 60 months of heavenly weather. On a July day a few years back, the weather was at its finest. The sun was shining about 78 degrees warm. A cool offshore ocean breeze was wafting through the open windows of our house. If ever I might have been justified in exclaiming, "Just another day in paradise," this was that day. But I didn't. I couldn't muster the words. I was agitated. In fact, I got so worked up that I had a crisis. A small domestic crisis, but a crisis nonetheless. The episode precipitated an epiphany or a eureka moment, or both. And in that short time I found myself grumbling, "I am taking the 100 Thing Challenge." Even accounting for my eccentricities, that is a pretty unusual thing for me to say, so let me backtrack and explain what happened. On that Saturday, I was juggling a fairly industrious middle-class American lifestyle. My family consisted of my wife, Leanne, and my young daughters, Lucy, Phoebe, and Bridget, who all demanded my attention, which I should say I have always been happy to give them. Well, usually. Also, I like to hike in the mountains and desert. In addition to perfect weather and proximity to the ocean, San Diego is close to mountains and deserts. The dog needed walking closer to home, and the cats needed to be kept safe from hungry coyotes. I owned a guitar that I would play every other night. I had my aspirational hobby, woodworking, which I turned my attention to once a weekend. I made a living with my day job in the marketing department of nearby Point Loma Nazarene University. On the side, I ran an audiobook publishing business, Christian Audio. And I had been blogging for a few years, mostly railing against excessive consumerism at stuckinstuff.com. Basically, I was a husband and father, an outdoorsy, animal-loving wannabe singer-songwriter, an entrepreneur, a likes-to-use-his-hands kind of guy who also felt a compulsion to write. And because I did all of these things, I had my own desk. It sat near my bed for the sake of convenience. It sometimes got messy. On this weekend day in July 2007, our family had spent quite a bit of time cleaning up the house. We picked up and trimmed the yard. We vacuumed the carpet and swept the bamboo floors downstairs. We did laundry and hung clothes. We crammed toys into closets and onto shelves. Eventually, I turned my attention to my business and made my way to the home office desk to look for something I was working on at the time. After one glance at the desk, I knew there wasn't a chance on God's green earth that I was going to find it. Things had gotten out of control. Objects on my desk were absorbed into an undifferentiated mass of clutter. When I surveyed the hopelessness of the situation, I did what any emotionally healthy person would do. I procrastinated. I put off my entrepreneurial piece of business and instead I wandered into my bedroom closet a dozen feet away. But when I walked from the mess of the home office desk and into the closet, the mess hadn't left me. The closet in our bedroom is a walk-in type with plenty of room for clothes, shoes, belts, hats, odds and ends, and even the empty luggage that we keep on the upper shelves. I keep one corner for storing my adventure gear. A backpack and tent fit in that corner, and my sleeping bag hangs from a nail near the ceiling. There was room for almost anything I might want to fit into that closet except me. I stood there, not easily able to move, and I started to panic a little. We had just cleaned up the house. A lot. And I should let you know we're not particularly materialistic people who intentionally collect an abundance of things. We don't live by the rule the person who dies with the most toys wins. In fact, we have tried to live by that rule's antithesis. Over the years, we've given many things away to people who need stuff more than us. We've tried to resist constant consumer acquisition. Our family has not lived like a family of hermits, we've just tried to live simply. But after we had spent the weekend cleaning and tidying, my desk and closet didn't seem to belong to a person who claimed to live a thrifty life. I left the upstairs and went down to the kitchen for a drink of ice water. The kitchen in our house is long and rectangular, and it has counter space with 12 drawers. 4 of them are junk drawers. A full 33% of the sliding storage space in our kitchen is devoted to knickknacks, things we rarely, if ever, use, and that we couldn't make a penny on if we tried to unload them at a garage sale. Things like keys for locks we no longer have, broken flashlights and their spent batteries, and a first-generation blue iPod mini that no longer turns on. When I counted the junk drawers, I did not include the 2 drawers so stuffed full of kitchen utensils that we have trouble closing them and sometimes cannot even open them. And I didn't count the 2 drawers bursting with dishcloths. I hesitate to mention the 15 cabinets. Let's just say that there were enough pots, pans, cookbooks, coffee fixings, vases, toys, craft supplies, and Tupperware crammed into them to guarantee that something would fall out every time one of them was opened. And there's no way I'm going to discuss the pantry. All this wasn't news to me, but I was looking at the situation differently. My panic began to mature into worry. Our kitchen has a door that opens to the garage. Back then, when I went through that door, I could take only one step before having to stop and make a hard left-hand turn. The turn was necessary because one pace into the garage, things started to pile up. Situated one stride in front of the door, there was an old collapsible bookshelf we had bought at Target. I had jury-rigged it to store long-armed woodworking clamps. The shelves also held a random orbit sander, an 18-volt cordless circular saw, 2 drills, dozens of bits, a 3-decades-old Sears Craftsman router, 2 antique hand planes, a hardly-used socket wrench set, a remote-controlled model of a Mini Cooper, a flashlight, always worthlessly low on battery power, and a never-used laser level from QVC, which my mom had bought for me and for each of the men of the family one Christmas. Our 2-car garage had room for, just a few other things. There were 2 workbenches. I'm on a roll here complaining, but let me pause and let you know that I made one of those workbenches with 3 glued-up sheets of hardwood ply, poplar trim, and an antique vise I found on eBay. It was so sweet. There was also a router table and a new router, an Australian-made Triton 2-horsepower plunge router, one of the best routers in the world. and resting against the wall near the router table was a sheet of particle board with a large piece of glass attached to it. This I used as a sharpening station for hand-plane blades. That is done by securing various grit sandpapers to the ultra-flat surface of the glass and using them to little by little hone the blades. The workbenches and router tables were not unlike the home office desk. It wasn't easy to find all the things I had on them, like nails, screws, hammers, screwdrivers, files, wrenches, awls, twine, insecticides, lubricant, glue, and craft putty. Did I mention I was trying to build a model train layout? I needed to do something with the 3 boxes, each containing hundreds of pieces of German Markland toy trains and track that I had collected over the years. Oh, and there was the rock-climbing wall that stretched across the back of the garage, and the floor-to-ceiling shelving I had built along the length of the far wall to store the 16 storage containers full of Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter, 4th of July, and Halloween decorations, and also the family camping gear. Recall that my personal camping gear was stored in my closet, since I am more fastidious about caring for adventure gear than the other adult in our family. Above the garage door were the hanging shelves I had built to store 8 more containers full of old files, run-down battery-powered toys, and extra American Girl dolls, who took turns sleeping for months in clear plastic tubs while their peers competed for loving attention with dozens of other toys in the house. Walking around our house and garage that day, I physically tripped on nothing, but inside I ran into some hard stuff. I realized I was a hypocrite. Ouch! I was griping on my blog about how consumerism is ruining people's lives, even as all of my possessions and the things I helped my wife and daughters collect were overrunning our home. I had to admit that I had a problem. Ugh! I was telling people to shun consumerism even as I continued to participate in it myself. It dawned on me. I was aware of the problem of consumerism. I had come up with the perfect name for it and used it for my blog's title, Stuck in Stuff. I was able to articulate the hindrance of consumerism, but I had not found and taken the actions that would free me from its constraints. In fact, over the years, one way I had escaped the paralysis of feeling stuck in stuff was to get away from the mess by going to the store to look for more things. My path to the store was paved with good intentions, like going to find a solution for storing all our stuff in a neat and orderly way. But I couldn't help myself. More than a few times I had taken a break from spring cleaning to browse storage containers at Target, only to come home with a new flashlight or a set of colored pencils or picture frame that I found on one of the store's evil bargain end caps. Or I had stared at a pile of shoes on the floor of my closet, each made for its different function, and thought, why? And then I would find myself at REI looking for a pair of crossover shoes that could serve multiple purposes, like hiking and casual wear. That is how, again with good intentions, I often turned 2 pairs of shoes into 3. But most troubling of all, on that summer day, I saw that I was living my scariest nightmare. My desire to live a meaningful life was getting forestalled by the petty day-to-day demands of all my stuff. As I stood in my garage, I realized that it was not just that all the stuff created a mess, requiring valuable time to clean up. That was true, but that wasn't the worst of it. I realized it was not the clutter, the over-accumulation of things, but rather the things themselves that were taking my attention away from what mattered in my life. Camping gear was getting my attention, not being outside. Tools were taking up my time, not using them to be creative. Toys were distracting me from the fun of playing. My things were not doing what they were meant to do, serve a greater purpose than possession alone. In that moment, I came to see that I had not merely misplaced a piece of paper on my desk. At some point in my life, before I lost the paper, I had lost my freedom. Of all people on earth, I thought there was no way it could happen to me. But I was a slave to my belongings. Maybe all my possessions were having fun bossing me around, yet I felt miserable. I returned to the house contemplative. I climbed the stairs and went to look in the mirror located in our bedroom. That's a place I have stood before. Whenever it is time to make a hard decision in my life, I go there. In the past, I had stood in front of the mirror and looked myself in the eye and inquired about my career. I had asked if I wanted to see myself 5 years later working at the same go-nowhere job that wasn't doing anything of value for the world. I had answered no. Back then, I responded to that negative answer with the positive energy it took to become an entrepreneur. I started an audiobook company that prioritized publishing the many thoughtful religious titles that had been passed over by other audiobook publishers. I even came up with the company's tagline, "Listen, enjoy, think, grow," because I believe that joyfulness and thoughtfulness are both necessary components of spiritual maturity. If I was going to be responsible for starting a company, I wanted it to be an organization that helped people be better humans. For the years that I was running Christian audio with my business partners, I was able to look in the mirror and see a person I felt was doing something of value for the world. But lately, that feeling of doing good work had shrunk away. I'd done something to change my impression of myself from a professional standpoint, but I didn't feel quite whole. Now, as I stood there looking, I recognized something was missing. I was a person living a half-truth. I believed that material possessions would overwhelm my life and keep me from meaningful pursuits unless I did something about it. But I had not actually done much by way of a response. I was looking at a person with ideas, but without much action. It wasn't a pleasant sight. And yet, rather than seeing only despair, I caught a little twinkle in my eye. I was galvanized to action. I wrote about it on my blog that weekend. I have an idea, a spontaneous idea that might change my life forever. I'm calling it the 100 Thing Challenge, and I'm taking it. Oh yeah, my life changed all right. Chapter 2. A Reluctant Entrepreneur. The 100 Thing Challenge developed after I had been running my own business for 4 years. But in the few months before the challenge occurred to me, I had started reassessing my role in the workplace as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. At around the same time, in the same month in fact, I decided to fundamentally alter my relationship to the world as a consumer and also made the first move toward selling my share of the business. Each was an impulse toward a simpler, less stressful, and more contemplative life, perhaps, but each move also represented a reaction against something. What I found in that time is that the entrepreneur's drive is not unlike the impulse that confronts us at the mall, the ill effects of what I call American-style consumerism. It is the compulsion for more and more. There is no stasis at the mall unless it is to catch your breath on a bench in order to rest up from more shopping. And as I ran a business, I came to realize that the natural inclination of the entrepreneur, which has been reinforced by our business culture, is the same as that of the shopper. Initially, this entrepreneurial drive is a good and necessary bent. Without it, all but the luckiest small businesses would fail, because it is exceedingly difficult to start a company. Without the resilience to keep trying to get bigger despite adversity, small businesses wouldn't overcome the trials of starting up. Not only that, it is an obvious requirement that a new company grow, but how much? Anyone experienced in business knows that too much growth too quickly is as fatal as no growth at all. But when is it fine to slow down or even stop? Most experienced business owners would say that there's never a time to slow down or stop growing. The exception, of course, is an economic recession that forces slow growth or stagnation. Who considers that a good business circumstance? There is a similar necessity for the adult consumer. Perhaps some people who strike out from their childhood house on their own overdo it when purchasing the things they need to establish a home of their own. But they do need to get some stuff. What I found in my own life and what helped push me over the top to do the 100 Thing Challenge was that the purchasing never stopped. From the time when Leanne and I began to establish a home of our own, I was always buying more and more stuff. It was as if setting up a new home never ended, as if the very notion of setting up implied endlessly recurring activity and never resting. When is it fine to slow down the buying or even stop shopping altogether? Most marketers and consumers alike would say that there's never a time to slow down acquiring stuff, let alone stop entirely. In my consumer experience, the exceptions were the times when we could not pay for or didn't have, or couldn't stomach, the credit to charge the things we wanted. Who considers not having enough money to buy all the things they want a good consumer circumstance? That same feeling of repetitiveness was known to me as a consumer, and it was known to me as an entrepreneur. The desire itself to get more and to grow more increased. There was no end in sight. I remembered chatting with a fellow entrepreneur once. He had sold a couple of businesses, was running another, and in his spare time worked in the ministry starting new churches. I reflected on how I had my hands in a few different business opportunities. There was another opportunity on the near horizon. Someday, I mused, I hope to have just one thing going with a lot of free time on my hands. No, you don't, he shot back, too sure of himself and me for my liking. I've made peace with it. We entrepreneurs can never rest. The expectation of the consumer in American-style consumerism is to buy and buy and buy some more. The expected route for a small business in American-style capitalism is to grow and grow and grow some more. The anticipation is the same as well. Both the shopper and the entrepreneur behave as if there is an end goal of contentment. But neither ever quits striving for that satisfaction. There's always a little more stuff to be had. There's always a little more profit to be had. I was prompted to rethink my consumption goals at the same time that I reconsidered the aims of my vocation as an entrepreneur. I liked Bill McKibben's ideas about creating businesses and communities focused on durability instead of growth. In his book, Deep Economy, he says that such businesses and communities may well yield less stuff, but they produce richer relationships. They may grow less quickly, if at all, but they make up for it in durability. Durable things last. That is more than most people these days can say about their stuff or their jobs. My entrepreneurial disposition manifested itself early in my life. I repeated first grade because of my restless energy and my natural inclination to resist established power structures. Later, I wandered through a community college, a state university, a Bible institute, and eventually graduate school at a liberal arts college. My, let's call it varied, education in the humanities in no way pointed toward the career I eventually found myself in, technology. But wandering about institutions where I never felt settled did foreshadow my urge to start my own thing outside of a pre-existing company. I actually became an entrepreneur on a Monday morning in 2004 at a Starbucks. My buddy Corey and I had been meeting once a week for about a year to chat about life and gripe about our day jobs. On that morning, he proposed that we start a business. How many businesses have been dreamed up in a Starbucks? A number, I warrant. Maybe more good ideas than have come to people spontaneously in their garages, maybe not. I was working for my father's technology consulting company without hope for purposeful work or future career development, and Corey was also suffering the daily grind. Corey had a longer commute than me, so he listened to audiobooks. After a year of commuting hours each day, he ran out of books he wanted to listen to. He discovered many of the best-selling Christian titles that he enjoyed reading had not been made into audiobooks. His idea was to start a publishing company to fill that gap in the market.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?